My name is Jeremy Foyt. I'm the co-founder of Milwaukee. This is a program on the Cloud Cafe, which we do a ton of different programs each week around different, really a variety of programs around different topics and different micro communities. So today we're really lucky to have a program called Change Starts Here from Gretchen Jameson. And a little known fact, her great-great-great-grandpa was John Jameson, the person who invented the whiskey, right? No.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, okay, no, that is not accurate. Okay, I figured I'd take a shot at just guessing that.
But the fact that you know that that's how my name is spelled means we can, in fact, be friends, Jeremy.
Indeed. If you have any Jameson questions, I can answer them too. But Gretchen is the Senior VP of Strategy and Academic Affairs at Concordia University, Wisconsin, and I will hand it over her to take it away. Thanks, Gretchen.
You know, Jeremy, thank you so much. And to the whole Milwaukee family, it is great to be here today, to be a part of this program. And I've been looking forward to it, right? We're going to be talking about this idea of change and this idea of how change happens and how we become change ready. And I think that is particularly relevant given what we're living through right now. In this time, right? That we are understanding change in ways we never thought we would have to do. And so that is brings us together for a topic that's pretty relevant. As Jeremy said, my name is Gretchen Jameson, and I have the privilege of serving at Concordia University. We are delighted to be a strong partner with Milwaukee and really respect the work that Milwaukee does here in our community. And so it's just great to be with you today to talk to you about something that is definitely a passion point for me, which is this idea of change. I've spent the better part of the last 3 years of my life actually researching and thinking about change. And so today I get to talk with you about it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. So when we think about change and where change starts, we tend to, particularly in organizations, be they for-profit or nonprofit, we tend to focus most on the management of change, how we embrace change once it's already at our door, how we manage it in the moment, and maybe thinking toward the future. But the reality is that change starts sooner, and embedding in our organizations this sort of attitude and mindset, a propensity for change readiness, is actually a critical competitive advantage that helps an organization build up its muscularity long before a change event actually happens. Now, I want you to think about your own organization right now and how much this thesis is actually true. We're living in change right now. We are adapting through kind of no choice of our own, right? We're being forced to adapt. Those organizations, I would propose, that already had a certain attitude, that was a certain openness toward change, are likely adapting better, more effectively, and perhaps more innovatively than organizations that just did not have that change readiness mindset already in their culture. And this is very different than just being able to manage change well. So we're going to dive in. And I mentioned that I have spent the last few years really thinking about change and researching change as a part of my doctoral work at the University of Southern California. And my project began with a question. And it was a simple question with multiple ways of answering it. Why do some organizations succeed while other organizations fail? And there are so many pathways to the answer to that question. But I was particularly curious about this relationship with change. When we look at the research, we see, right, and this will probably not be a new statistic for most of us, that 70% of change initiatives fail, while at the same time, most of our industries, most of our sectors in which all of us work, be it higher education, like where I work, or be it the for-profit sector, be it the nonprofit sector, healthcare, energy, any of these spaces, we know that change is demanded from us. So that 70% of change initiatives fail while we all exist in a time of volatile, dramatic, unprecedented change. That means we have a problem in need of a solution, right? So the question, why do some organizations succeed while others fail, became just my deep interest for 3 years of scholarship, understanding not only the structures and management practices and the sort of transactional, tactical, logical things that organizations do to be successful, but more their attitude, their character, their DNA, and what is happening in an organization that is truly change ready. So change readiness, again, as a concept, is different from change management, right? And it's a success imperative, I would submit. It is a sustainable, renewable source of competitive advantage that exists within you as an individual and within your organization. I want you to think about that for a second. It is a sustainable, renewable source of competitive advantage that exists within you and within organizations. This idea of toggling between individual and organization is fundamentally unique about this concept of change readiness. When we as leaders and workers think about the fact that it's not just how my organization is change ready, but how I as an individual am change ready, how my team is change ready within this space, all of that adds up to the collective whole of change readiness. Before I get into all that, I want to get to know those of you who are watching today just a little bit better. And so I am going to actually stop screen sharing for a quick second. And I'm going to open up a different document. And I'm going to invite you to go to a website, and I'm going to put it in the chat box for you. And if you're on Facebook, you'll see it in just a minute. You'll be able to go there yourself. You're going to go to menti.com. And when you get to menti.com, you're going to go ahead and put in this code. And again, Facebook Live viewers, I'm about to put this live on the screen, so you'll be able to see it as well. You can do this on your device or a tablet, or open up another window in your browser if you're watching at your desktop. And there's a little poll there for you. I'm going to go ahead and screen share now so that you can all see it. And I just want to get to know the room a little bit. I'm curious who is with us and what your role is in your organization. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a quick second and completing that, it will help me to see. Oh, and good, you just added it on Facebook. Excellent, very well done, Rita, thank you. Just to kind of see who's in the room, who's playing today, who's in the space. It'll give us a chance to understand the room a little bit better. So right now, one of you have done it, which is great. That means I get to deliver the entire talk to you as a mid-level employee, which is awesome. Oh, none of these, here come a few others. We're watching this change. This is really helpful, gang, because this will help me toggle sort of my talk to fit who's in the room. Excellent. Good. All right, I'm going to keep asking you a few other questions. So I'm going to advance this, and you're going to see that pop up on your device. There we go. Good. So the thing about change is that it elicits in us feelings, actual emotions. And I want you in this particular question to focus on that word feel. How do you feel about change, right? When you're experiencing it in the moment, how do you tend to feel about it within your organization? Do you feel a sense of belief that there's value in it? Do you kind of feel begrudging that you're sort of being dragged along with it? Or do you feel sort of guilty? Well, good. I'm seeing so many of you say, yes, I believe in the value. That's great. That means that we have a shared value framework to talk about today, right? This idea of change being something we value, because not everyone comes at it from that particular emotional perspective. And we'll talk about that today. Because for you, as a mid-level manager or leader, as an entry-level leader, I will use that word, understanding that the concept of change readiness within your organization depends as much upon the organization as its individuals. This is huge. And it actually gives you a tremendous amount of agency in your vocation, in your work, to move change and to build readiness in your organization, regardless of the level that you're at. So this next one, here's the question. What value does your org's culture place on change. And that can be construed a lot of ways, right? We notice that our culture values change by the messages that are sent from senior leadership, by the policies and practices that are in place, the structure that's there. Is it one that allows us to be nimble and agile, or is it a little bit more confined and constrained, right? And that's important to understand, because again, when we're talking about readiness, we need to have a sense of both the organization and the individual's aptitude, appetite, awareness of change to really understand how readiness develops. This is great. You guys are playing along really, really well. What I'm curious about too, as I get to know you and as we begin today, is just how you feel again about change. So that first question I asked you, I forced you to choose one of those three multiple choices. Now I'm curious if you just put a word in, a word that would describe how you feel, again, so those emotion, those affective words are actually important, how you feel about change. I'm just curious what word you might use to describe it, which is really a lot of fun. This is good. You guys are playing well. Oh, I like whoever put that change makes you feel refreshed, that it's refreshing, that it's also scary, right? There's this interesting tension, and we're living this right now, aren't we, everyone? This idea that the change we are daily adapting to in the kind of post-COVID reality can be all of those emotions all at once, and certainly in our homes and with our partners and our families, and certainly in our workplace. This is great. Just give you a second to digest what your colleagues are putting in here as we think about this together. Good. Now, this one is an interesting one. When we think about how change, works for us, we think about our level of tolerance for certain things. Do I have a little bit of tolerance, or do I have a lot of tolerance for just certain key concepts, right? What is my tolerance, for example, as a leader? Again, leader, I'm using that word at executive level, middle level, entry level. That leadership word applies in all of those places. And maybe that's a separate cloud cafe that we could do. But as a leader, how do I feel about status quo? How do I feel? What's my tolerance for innovation from myself and from others? What's my tolerance for risk? What's my tolerance for failure, which is actually huge, right? You've got to be able to fail if we're going to change. What is my tolerance for change agency in myself or others? Now, here's where this gets kind of interesting. I'm going to ask you to respond to the same question, but this time, and I want us to take a look, this time I'm going to ask us to think about the degree of tolerance for these same things in your organization. So the first question said, what is your personal degree of tolerance? This time I'm asking you, what's your sense of your organization's degree of tolerance for each of these? Look at status quo just went boom, right? Oh my goodness, you guys, this is why you're in this Cloud Cafe today. This is why you are here. Look at that, right? Here's what gets really interesting. If we go back and forth between the two, you know what we're going to see, right? You do? I'm sure you do. See, I'm talking to you like you're really here, right? I know what we're going to see that by and large, we see ourselves as more tolerant to things like innovation and risk, change agency, and even failure. And we perceive our organizations to be less tolerant of those same things and more tolerant of inertia, right? More tolerant of inertia, more tolerant of status quo, less tolerant of risk, etc. Here's what's fascinating, and I wish we had some executive level people on the call because we need them to think about this too, but you can think about it right where you are. The organization is simply the sum of its individuals. The organization is simply the sum of its individuals. And organizations that begin to understand that really, really well and very, very richly become more change ready than those that struggle to understand the same. So think about that. That ability to say, wow, if all of our individuals, I'm going to tell you something, in my research over the last 3 years, consistently, dramatically, repeatedly, what you just displayed in your answers to those two questions, how do I personally perceive versus how do I think my organization perceives, it played out the same across literally hundreds of interviews and surveys and inquiries. So there's something going on there, right? And so today, what I want to present to you are some strategies that will help you develop not only your own change readiness. I mean, you're here in this Cloud Cafe today for the betterment of self, which is awesome, and I applaud you for that, right? But you're also here, I think, to probably think about how your organization can also be bettered. And in this time, we need you. We need you leading the development of change readiness in your firm, in your organization, more than ever before. So this is my definition of change readiness. After all of that research, it was like the second to last line of the dissertation. This is what, after all of that, I believe change readiness is. I believe that it's an equation of sorts. It's an equation of sorts that is dependent upon an organization's collective ability to both create and sustain a system that will elevate individual capabilities of its people to achieve readiness. So again, you see even in that definition, this balance, this tension between you as the individual and your organization. And what you as the individual do in shaping change readiness really matters. So I said this project of mine began with a question, right? It began with a question, why do some organizations succeed while others fail? But it continued with a curiosity. And I became deeply curious about those factors that most influence managers and leaders in particular to embrace and effectuate, make happen change, right? What are those factors? And so I spent 3 years researching this question. And I'm going to share just a little bit of it with you and hopefully share it with you in a way that is practical and usable. I spent acres of time, hours of time interviewing folks who work at what you might say is sort of the mid-level and kind of entry-level even supervisory management role. And I was keenly interested in that layer of the organization more than even senior leadership, because I just had this hunch that that's where the work actually is going to happen. That's where the real kind of meat is really occurring, the actual genesis of change readiness. And so I interviewed people and I talked with them about what they know about change, what they don't know, and what motivates them. What are their beliefs and their mindsets about change? And what are their perceptions? What are their attitudes and values? I talked with them about their perceptions too of their organizational cultures, both the larger model of their culture and the little settings where they have control, right? In their discrete work time with other people, in their team settings. And I tried to glean from all of that answers to my question. What are those factors, the knowledge, motivation, and organization factors that most produce readiness in individuals and by then extension in systems? So I'm going to share a few with you, and I hope that you're able to apply this to your own work. And I think it is pretty relevant. Obviously, I've been drinking my own Kool-Aid. I think it is pretty relevant in this day and age, but I hope it's helpful for you. And at the end, I hope we can have questions and good dialogue together about how this might be applicable for you. So starting with knowledge. Actually, what we know is the building block of readiness. Knowledge is absolutely the building block of readiness. Without it, without understanding the facts, the procedures, the concepts about how your organization works and about how your organization adapts to change, without knowing those things, you can't move forward. Here's what I learned. I learned that what change-ready leaders know, what change-ready leaders like you know, they know the facts. They know the facts. Every one of them, when I interviewed managers who then proved to be more change-ready than their peers, those that were more change ready knew the facts about the gap, performance gap, KPI gaps, whatever it might be. They had it down. They understood the facts about the gap between what is in the organization and what should be, and they could talk about it artfully. They also knew how to perform procedurally, right? How they should procedurally perform transformational behavior, how to engage in relationships. They could describe it. They didn't always practice it, which became interesting as the research went on, but they knew it. They had kind of educated themselves, right? So for you to be change ready, these are some things where you can begin. Acquire the knowledge, And sometimes we skip over this and we're in this information inundated society, or we're at work and we get so many emails and so much information. But to really deeply educate yourself about what's going on in the organization. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And what do I know about the gap? And what should I know about helping us bridge the gap? Read deeply, talk to others, talk to superiors, invite someone to mentor you, really become knowledgeable about your firm, because knowledge shapes beliefs and attitudes first, and then behaviors change. That's how that works, which is kind of interesting to think about. So what my findings show are this. The findings revealed that leaders who know those performance goals talk more often about the future. An indicator of a change-ready organization and a change-ready person is someone who talks about the future. And leaders who knew their performance goals and could talk about that, were knowledgeable about those gaps, they tended to talk more often about the future with their people and with their colleagues and with their peers. Secondly, I found out that leaders know, good change-ready leaders know that they need to persuade people toward change. It's a persuasive behavior. When you as an employee, as a manager, as a supervisor, as an entry-level worker, when you want to help move things forward, you have to become very, very persuasive. But they weren't really sure how to do it, right? So they knew they needed to do it, but they weren't sure how to do it. That was the big sticking point. And thirdly, they needed to know, so this was a gap that I found, they needed to know and understand more effectively how individuals influence the organization. Let me give you an example. So in my organization, we are going through an expedited strategic plan process right now because of the impact of COVID. We were already scheduled to start reworking our next plan. This just upped the ante, and I'm sure it was true in your spaces too. It was interesting, yesterday in a meeting, I asked the group, and these are leaders in our organization, what needs to happen so that we actually effectuate this plan? And every group said, leaders need to empower us to make it happen. And I thought, what does that code speak for? Because this is a room full of leaders. So what are we really saying? And again, it's this idea that the organization is somehow disparate, separate from the individual. And until we recognize that organizations are only a sum of the individual parts, man, we are holding ourselves back, particularly with regard to change readiness. So what can you do? What can you do? Well, here's what you can do with regard to knowledge. Assess what you know, increase your knowledge. Make it a goal that you are going to increase your knowledge about change, how it works, about readiness, and specifically increase your knowledge about the transactional and transformational behaviors and attitudes that shape change. And a great resource that I would recommend that you look at to do that is a classic, right, by Peter Senge. I would do the most like current, I think the latest edition was 2006, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization is one place where you can educate yourself. So that was the knowledge piece. What about motivation? So if knowledge is the building block, motivation becomes the fundamental driver. This is where all the energy is at. Our motivation toward change is what animates everything, and it starts with you. It doesn't start with your supervisor or your boss or your leader. It starts with you and within you, and that is a powerful piece to really realize. The mindset of change-ready leaders. So motivation is a mindset, right? Change-ready leaders believe, as many of you did actually in that Menti poll that we took, change is worth the cost. It's called value cost proposition. It is worth what it's going to cost me. And it does cost you, right? It takes more time. It takes blood, sweat, and tears. It's going to cost you, and it is absolutely worth the cost. Success is anticipated. So for change-ready leaders, we have something called value expectancy. We expect success. It's a really fundamental mindset, right? That we make the active choice and to pursue the mindset that says, I expect this is going to be successful. Not in like a blind, ignorant sort of way, but that we believe the cost is worth it, and I have a belief that we are going to do this. And then finally, belief, belief, belief. So I believe the cost is worth it. I believe it will happen, and I believe I can do it. Those are three related, but slightly different things. I believe the cost is worth it. I believe it can be done, and I believe I can do it. And so motivation is built through what we call efficacy, belief that is individual belief, self-efficacy, and collective shared belief that we build up as a team. And if we were face to face, I would be able to stop here and say, and maybe you can post it in the chat, tell me an example of a time when you were a part of a team that built collective efficacy. Share an example, and go ahead and do it in the chat. Share an example where you were a part of something where change was worth the cost, right? Belief, belief, belief. So motivation is built through efficacy, and it results in agency, which is, another word for that is liberty, right? Your ability to effectuate your own outcome. Agency is one of the most powerful things that we possess, right, as humans, but also and especially in our workplace. And those of you who explicitly manage others, that I would submit should be, and this is another, so I'm giving Rita and Jeremy all these ideas for future cloud cafes. That would be another good one. It should be your obsession as a manager to make sure that you are doing all you can to construct agency in the people you lead. I mean, that you have no other reason for being there really, is to build that up in them as they pursue the mission of your organization. So my findings revealed 3 things. That leaders' value for the cost of change came from a personal match to the organization's mission. I want to talk about this one, and hopefully you'll take a few notes on it, because this actually ended up being one of the most signature findings of this project. Often we talk about mission fit, right? You can raise your hand if you've, if you've heard in your organization, well, we want to get an employee that's a good fit. We want them to be a good fit with us, the organization. What I actually discovered, change-ready organizations work the other way around. In a change-ready organization, the change-ready individual has said through their own agency, I attach, this organization attaches to me, not I attach to the organization. Now that's very subtle, but I actually am convinced it's very powerful. And it has actually changed how I even interview people in our organization. Instead of kind of asking questions to assess their mission fit with us, I ask questions to help them think about, do we fit them? Do we fit your personal values? What are your key values and passions? How do you see us being a fit for that? And turning it around. This, to me, was essential in discovering what really motivates people toward change. Secondly, leaders carry differing degrees of belief. And what's interesting is that you demonstrated this actually yourselves in when I asked you to think about yourself and then the organization. They tend to have a higher sense of individual efficacy belief than they do organizationally. I believe I can do it, but I'm not real sure if my organization can. I believe I can. And when you ask all kinds of people, almost all of them say that. Well, I believe I can. Well, what about the organization? I don't think the organization can. The people are the organization, right? And thirdly, change-ready leaders consistently use what I call the sense, seize, reconfigure approach. This comes from a scholar named Teese. And sense, seize, reconfigure is this idea that as I go about my day, and I bet you do this, if you're a change-ready person, you do this already. You go about your day, and even when you're out running on the trail or dealing with your family or at work, you sense how something could be different. You sense it, and then you seize the opportunity to pursue that. And you're willing, and you all showed this in your responses to the quiz, you're willing to reorganize the resources you have to actually make it happen, to effectuate it. So you sense something could be different, better, solved. You seize the moment, and then you reconfigure things to get it done. That is a key piece of the motivation of a change-ready leader. So what can you do? What can you do? Many of you answered that you are entry-level or mid-level in your role in your organization. You can, regardless of your level, become personally involved in a strategic change project. And the reason that matters so much is that personal interest drives motivation. Personal interest drives motivation. So if you're saying, well, I'm entry level, how do I make that happen? Seek out, pursue, right, a leader who will bring you along. I promise you they're there. And if they're not, I don't know, maybe a different organization is the place for you, right? And if you are someone who has the beauty of managing a team, help connect those people in personal ways to strategic change projects that are meaningful, relevant, important, and bring them to the table. Because when people are personally invested, they become more motivated, and that builds change readiness. This one is a classic. You've probably all read it, right? John Kotter, Leading Change. If you haven't read it, you should. If you have read it, read it again. Or read one of his other books like The Heart of Change, right? Or look up all of his articles on Harvard Business Review around the same topic. But he talks most about motivation. Finally, organization. So we have knowledge, the building block, motivation, the driver, and organization, which is where everything happens. So change-ready leaders design organizations that do a few things. And again, you're a leader regardless of the level of the enterprise you serve. You're a leader because you can make decisions about how you're going to conduct yourself, which will impact the culture. So quickly, cultural models are like the house, okay? So I'm in my house right now. Settings are the discrete rooms in that house. Settings are like a thermostat. You can make people miserable or really happy by how you turn up or down the thermostat. And the settings contribute to the feeling of the whole. So the fact that right now in my office, it's kind of balmy and steamy because the air conditioning is not running, it's creating a setting in this house as a whole. So you, entry-level employee, mid-level manager, senior-level executive, the way you conduct yourself in the individual settings of your day actually do build and feed the culture. And so change-ready leaders are change conscious, and they work at that in their individual settings. They deliver a sense of daily belief that change can happen. And they deliver it through their words and their attitudes and their buoyancy and their willingness to lean in. And thirdly, they consistently connect the vision to the values of the people and show how those match and help people feel that sense of purpose. I found that, again, leaders often differentiate between their own readiness and the organization's. We have work to do there. I found that leaders lack the time that they need to actually develop readiness, and we need to push for that in our organizations. And I found that by and large, inconsistently, most of our organizations don't really use leaders to link vision and values. That's a key piece. And that's something that if you are on this Cloud Cafe and you're a senior level leader or an upper level management person, I'd love to talk more with you about that because it's critical to the competitive stance of your organization. But for all of you, what can you do? Well, you can consistently, dramatically, repeatedly connect your own practice with your own passions. You can consistently, dramatically, repeatedly connect your vocation to the vision of the organization. You can consistently, dramatically, repeatedly connect task and tactics to a bigger end game, be that in the organization or for you individually. A great book that you should take a look at if this is interesting to you is, again, a classic by Edgar Schein. Schein is one of the leading thinkers in this space, Organizational Culture and Leadership. It's worth a read, really worth a read. And then, and Rita and Jeremy, we can make this available to folks. For those of you who are like geeking out, you're like, oh, I want to read, I want to know more about this. Here is just a little snippet, like consider this sort of a mini MBA crash course on change leadership of some of my favorite articles that speak to the things that I've shared with you today. And it's a place for you to sink your teeth in a little bit beyond some of those texts that I suggested for you. And finally, if you have questions, you can join me on LinkedIn, you can find me, you can email me, and I would be delighted to talk about this with you. So Jeremy, with that, I'm gonna just say, I would love to answer questions, either that you've received or that maybe you have as you've listened. But I'm, yeah, interested in what people are thinking.
We'll start with one from Facebook Live, and it's like, what processes can you companies or I guess in your case, school, universities, or just organizations in general, put into place to allow change to happen? So what mechanisms or processes can companies put into place to allow change to happen? I guess that's coming from somebody that might be entry level that doesn't have that authority to maybe make change.
Yep. So that's such a good question. One of my recommendations would be that organizations need to figure out ways to enable senior leadership and mid-level management and entry-level workers access to each other to participate together meaningfully in whether it's projects or decisions that kind of nesting throughout an organization of how decisions are made is part of that key connection. And managers play a really important role in this. They ultimately are this like key linkage between kind of the senior level and the front line. And that linkage shouldn't just be surface. It should be really a real dynamic participation. So if nothing else, opening up meaningful opportunities for people at every level to work together, to actually think together and make decisions together. If nothing else, that starts to shift culture toward a more open stance toward change.
And if you have questions, we have some in the Q&A here, but you can also ask them in the chat. We'll read off this first one from attendee. What suggestions do you have to advance change readiness if direct supervisors are change resistant?
Oh, so, I am guessing that one comes from someone who is working for a change resistant supervisor. Yeah. Well, step one, I would become really, really knowledgeable about change, right? So a lot of us will say, oh yeah, change is important. But when you arm yourself with knowledge, you become just more effective, right? In arguing your case or presenting your case. So I would take that initiative to assess what you know and fill in some gaps for yourself and just build that up, because that's going to serve you well in your career no matter what. And then it tends to be, with those change resistant folks, results, right? So figuring out ways that you can have small wins and craft results that prove the point and prove that it can happen. And at the very far extreme, honestly, there always is that place where you have to kind of go, man, is this culture fit right for me? I mean, if I'm really focused on moving things forward and I'm a change ready person and I've really got a lot of energy for that, and I'm in a place where I'm consistently just like blocked at that, that's a whole other conversation about kind of career development and formation and where you're at and how you fit in the culture. But I would start with knowledge, and then I would start with small wins, little small wins that demonstrate results, for sure.
Another question from Facebook Live. And if you have questions, post them in the Q&A, or you can make yourself, you can unmute yourself. Change can result in failure. How do you prepare leadership for failure and have them see it as a good thing?
Wow. You know, none of us like to fail usually. It's one of those things where we know we should have an appetite for it. But often the stakes are so high. And again, we talk about this a lot in our organization. You know, are we allowing enough space for small wins, but also small failures, right? So that so we get a little practice at that, so that when the time comes and we fail, it's not this like epic thing, right? So making sure that there's an opportunity in the organization for balanced risk, the opportunity to try and to innovate. And that has to happen in bite-sized pieces. If the only way for that to happen are these huge pieces, no one's going to want to do that. Everyone is going to be averse to that because the stakes are simply too high. It's not safe, right? And so I think that's a key piece. For those of us who are executive leaders or managers, how do we model failure ourselves, right? How do we talk about it? I actually had a retreat that I conducted once where I had everybody write their failure resume. People were terrified to do it. They had to come to the retreat with a full out resume, just like you would do for a job, but it was all the things they had failed at. And I started by sharing mine. And it actually unlocked this like incredible conversation because we were willing to say, here's where I have just stepped in it. So as a leader or manager, how do you model and how do you react to your own failure and those that happen in your teams?
I imagine there's obviously a lot of people looking for new careers right now. What questions would you ask in an interview of the organization to understand their change, if they're risk averse, or, you know, to understand what their level of comfort is around change? That's
a really good question. Well, I would really ask a lot of questions about, let me back up. I would strive to investigate, because that's what you're doing in an interview. I would strive to investigate how are their espoused values, that is, the values that they probably talk about a lot when they open the interview or that they post on their website, how are those actually enacted? And I would want really clear examples of that. Because then I can start to get a sense of, are the values, because you're probably attracted to the firm because you saw their values, you saw their brand, or there's something about them that hopefully was attractional to you. But to find out, is it real? Are their espoused values and their enacted values aligned? And if they can't give you really specific examples of how that's been true, chances are you've got a disconnect going on there. And then I would actually ask, especially in this time, specific questions about how they've adapted, but also how they've innovated in this current context. What's that look like? And how has the average employee been a part of that? And just listen, have your best listening on for real examples, not just flowery value language, but actual evidence, right? That this is happening.
Okay, that's all the questions we have. How about one more for me personally?
Okay.
I'm in a lot of committee meetings over the years,
Yeah.
and I generally hear the cliche, don't reinvent the wheel. And when you think about innovation, so often people think it comes from looking what other people are doing, but real innovation comes from seeing what no one else is doing.
Yes.
Why do we always fall back on that terminology of don't reinvent the wheel when we know true innovation is about reinventing things?
Isn't that fascinating, right, Jeremy? And here's what's kind of funny, like when the wheel was originally invented, I mean, it's been reinvented multiple times. So actually the whole like analogy, like the original Sumerian wheel was not real effective in how we do things today, right? It is that idea of disruption, and it makes people, I mean, you saw how all of us responded in that Menti poll, right? Like, how does my organization feel about risk aversion? Very high tolerance, right? And so this idea of being fearful of disruption, I think is huge. What's interesting to me right now is that, and I just said this in a meeting in our organization the other day, we're not actually necessarily innovating right now. We're adapting, right? We're adapting. And there's a careful difference between adaptation and innovation. And that need to be truly disruptive and to actually own your category, not just your product. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So like, how can I innovate so that, and I work at Concordia, right? How can we innovate Concordia University so that we're leading the category of higher ed, not just having a really great product, right? A really great brand. And so it's that kind of thinking as you're, listening in a committee. What are they really saying by let's not reinvent the wheel? I mean, is it a fear? Is it a fear of disruption? Is it a sense that they don't know what to do? Because I think you're right. That does come up a lot. A lot.
Okay. Oh, we got one more question in the audience here. 1 second. The question is, what role do you feel communication plays in change or readiness change management? How would you advise leaders to be more transparent?
So because I'm at home, I can do this. I'm going to get something to show the viewer or the participant who just asked. This is an awesome read. You will love this. This is Lori K. Lewis, Organizational Change, Creating Change Through Strategic Communications by Lori K. Lewis. It is an excellent kind of primer on the foundations of communications theory, if that's not your jam, and that makes it really practical and applicable. This idea of transparency is so interesting, right? I think I like to be curious. I'm sure you all do too, right? When we're leading and to be kind of a sociologist to sort of, what do people mean when they're using that word, right? When a staff member or an employee says, we need leadership to be more transparent. My first question is always, how do you understand that word? Because I want to make sure the way you understand that word and the way then I as a leader choose to pivot or respond fits, right, with what you're thinking. So transparency, I think part of it is bringing people along. And that gets back to that other idea about making sure that we're inviting people to be personally a part of strategic projects. Yes, that can be messy. Yes, it can be difficult. You also have to be non-defensive because you're going to hear people think differently and share a different perspective on the organization. But I think if we can invite people along in appropriate ways, whatever that looks like in your context or your setting, your firm, that in and of itself changes the game on communication. It really does. But I always start with, how do people understand that word transparent? How does the leader understand it? How does the staffer understand it? Because if they don't have an aligned definition, they're going to keep talking past each other.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Gretchen. This is awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This will be recorded, and we will send this out after the program. So thank you,
Awesome.
everyone, for joining us today.
All right. Stay healthy. Stay well.